The brief talk is on business cycle dynamics, because what I think is that at present we are at a very unusual juncture in our history. And so we have to take that into account. We are, as I would argue, at the lower end of the business cycle. And what we do to get out of it would determine how fast we emerge and how long it takes. Before that, I'd like to thank the university, the COTE organizers for inviting me, and by extension, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. I would join with the words of Professor Sankat and Professor Bourne, and also the spirit of Dr. Thomas's work, that we need to have a nice blend between academia and practitioners, so that while at the Central Bank we try to keep the academic rigor, we know that it's important that it move quickly into policy. So this is what we are trying to do. So let me get quickly into the meat of the subject. Where are we now in Trinidad and Tobago? It's a very unlikely configuration of forces that we have, and I don't think this can actually persist. You'll find that I am looking in some of the graphs at data that is actually spanning from 1990 and so forth, just to put things in perspective, because we have a set of forces now that if you don't interpret it correctly, you could make some wrong judgments and wrong policy prescriptions. So some of the things that we have now are slow economic activity but rising prices. This is unusual. Evidence of job losses, but still we have a lot of unused capacity. So both of them together show that there's a lot of slack in the economy still. Then we have record low interest rates that, we've never had before. We have a situation where interest rates are next to zero, but we have inflation is high. So that affects not only savings, but investment. Then we have a situation now, as was mentioned before, of some fiscal deficits. After years of fiscal surpluses, now we have two, and now an upcoming third year of fiscal deficits. So this is, again, unusual. Then, from my perspective at the central bank, monetary policy is walking a very delicate tightrope, and it is somewhat challenging. So the first issue is the growth that we have now. The green line would be the growth that we have been seeing. And if you look at it, you would see that from 1993, in 1993 we had a dip, we had a contraction of the economy, but pretty much after that, Trinidad and Tobago was, I wouldn't say boom, but it was, moving along nicely. There was no talk about recession or whatever you want to call it. There was continuous growth. This was unusual in terms of other countries. Having worked at the IMF, most of the times the preoccupation is with low growth, fiscal deficits, balance of payments deficits. We had the opposite situation. But now we have, you'll see at the tail end here, you'll see that the economy had contracted in 2009. So this is one thing. But the other interesting part of it is what is happening with inflation. That inflation has generally been, not that high. It's under 10%, sometimes just hovering around 5%, even in the days where you had a strong economy. But what normally happens is that once you have overheating of an economy, a lot of activity, then this pushes up prices. So there was some evidence of that. In 2009, inflation really picked up to 14.5%, I think it was, in October, year on year. But now we have a situation where the economy is still a bit sluggish, but then you see 16.2% inflation year on year in August, I think it was. So the question is, well, what's going on? This is unusual. This can't persist. The second issue is on and Dr. Thomas would be very well interested in this sort of thing, the signs of job losses and economic slack. Basically, we see that what this graph represents is the unemployment rate in Trinidad and Tobago over the years. And as I said, I went backwards to put it in a sort of a perspective. And we see that, comparatively speaking, our unemployment rate has really gone down a lot. But at the same time, at the end of 2003 and coming up now, we see it was recently announced that we have a 6.7% unemployment rate. So unemployment is moving up to some extent. It's breaking the downward trajectory that we've had, but it's not as before. The other thing, and this might be a little difficult to interpret, but this is supposed to be a factory here on the side, and with the smokestack and all that. And the red part is the capacity that is utilized. What it is, our latest data at the central bank shows that just about 2/3 of manufacturing capacity is being used, so that manufacturers still have a lot of slack, and they can still improve or boost production without employing much factors of production. This would be important because you would know the debate in the U.S. about jobless growth and so forth. In other words, that growth can pick up, but because businesses have retooled, then they may not absorb much labor immediately. Another thing that had been mentioned before, Dylan went into this quite adequately, is our situation on the fiscal side, that we've been used to having, fairly long periods of fiscal surpluses. So what this is showing is the fiscal balance, which is revenue minus expenditure, as a percent of the size of the economy or the gross domestic product. And what it is showing is that since, let's say after 1993 or so, we've been having more or less surpluses. There were some years when you had deficits, but mainly you had surpluses. Now, we are at a situation where for the past 2 years, we've plunged into deficits, and these are quite, they're not something to sneeze at. It's 5-point-something% of GDP is quite important. So we've had one in the last fiscal year, and the fiscal year previous to this one, then the last one which ended just last week, Thursday, because it goes up to the end of September. And then the government is also projecting another one for the fiscal year coming up because it needs to create a surplus to boost economic activity. So again, that is something that we need to take into account. And why is this important? Because this naturally has implications for the public debt. Because the light blue histogram is really the public debt as a share of GDP or the size of the economy. And we would see that it has been for more or less trending downwards. And then in the last couple of years, it has been picking up to some extent. So we have to be watching that because, as you know, if you spend more than you earn, then you have to get it somewhere. You would normally borrow, and so you borrow from one of the banks or wherever, or from your parents or so forth, your debt goes up. So this is something we have to take into account. And why is this important? Because you look at if you look at the line below, which is the red line, it shows the revenue, the interest cost, because once you borrow, you have to pay back, and you have to pay back at interest. And what this line is showing below is the share of interest, the government interest, in relation to their revenue. So that over the last couple of years, it has been ticking up. About 10% of all that the government earns is going to pay interest. So this is something to watch. Now, let's go on the monetary side, on the interest rates and so forth. So let's look at this. And we have an unusual situation now. And I say interest rates, how low can you go? Because a lot of people are worried, are saying, well, what's going on? Treasury bill rates are next to zero. You have, all about, you can't, even on foreign currency, it's very low. In Japan and a lot of other countries, they reach the lower bound of, monetary policy in terms of the interest rate. So it is something that we are also experiencing here. And if you look at the numbers, it's quite telling. I'll just use a very summary indicator looking at the blue line would be the real interest rates on loans. What I mean is that you have the interest rate that you pay on average on loans, but it's real in the sense that you take out the inflation component. So the higher the real interest rate on loan, the more people would be discouraged to borrow, right? And the flip side, right? But what we see here is an unusual situation just at the end of the period. And generally, real interest rates have been positive, the blue line above zero. And the red line shows private sector credit growth. And this has generally been quite robust. This is the percentage change per year. But if you look at the very last part of the line, what we have now is that it's a very strange situation. The real interest rates on loan have turned negative again, but private sector credit has continued to be weak. So what we have, we went low already, so monetary policy now. It creates, as I said, a dilemma for monetary policy, and I put it as monetary policy pushing on a string. What do I mean? Let's say you want to move a book, and you put a piece of stick to move the book, it will move. But if you tie a string to it, and you push the string, it goes nowhere. You could pull it, but pushing it. So what I mean is that with interest rates so low, and the central bank has been reducing its repo rate, which is the yellow line. But so far, because money supply has been moving up and so forth, and commercial banks have been actually responding by reducing their rates, but credit has not been picking up. In fact, credit has been keeping down, so that the objective of reducing the interest rates would be to stimulate credit. But because of confidence issues and so forth, this has not been happening. And then the unusual part of it, as I said, is that generally a central bank would tighten monetary policy, and this, you could see the relation here, when inflation is picking up. But now it's a strange situation where inflation has picked up, but the central bank is still in an accommodative or loosening mode, and this is because of economic activity. So, be close to the trough, but we are not. The question is, are we there yet, or are we? How fast would we get out of it? So our future trajectory depends on several factors, of course. And the first thing is the global environment, because the global environment is what caused our problems, as was well mentioned before. And the IMF World Bank meetings are currently in Washington now. These are the latest projections. In summary, I won't go through all the details, but it shows that a shallow recovery is expected in the global economy. But we have to look at certain things. One of the things is that global food prices, after the highs in 2008 or so, had gone down, but they seem to be picking up to some extent. I won't overdo it, because the numbers we have show that maybe in July, August, they had picked up, but by October, the first data in October shows that it may be not moving up too fast. So, where are we now, and what are so this is the concluding remarks. What would have to happen, and what affects where we go from here? I think in the short run, the public sector stimulus would need to continue. As in many other countries, it is still too early for the public sector to take a back seat. But the public sector should concentrate on what it knows best, which is providing the infrastructure for businesses, an enabling environment for the private sector, and a set of public goods. For those of you who have done economics, you would know that those are the goods that the public sector could provide more efficiently. And if you leave it to the private market, such as security or climate change or something, then it may not be efficiently provided. So concentrate on that. As I said, monetary policy can play a supporting role by encouraging financial intermediation while keeping an eye on inflation. And the punchline of this talk is that ultimately a sustainable upswing would depend on private sector activity. It's the private sector that needs to take the lead role in the economy, and confidence is key. And a strong, durable recovery must be based on improved efficiency in all markets, employment of best practices to world standards, efficient financial markets, and rising labor productivity. Everybody needs to play their part. So in conclusion, we have an unusual situation in Trinidad and Tobago, prompted by an international financial and economic crisis. The global environment remains key because we are a small player. And the public sector action can help to boost the economy in the short run, but ultimately must give way to a strong private sector. So with these remarks, I thank you.